Welcome to Autoimmune Secrets. I'm your host, Jonathan Otto. In episode 2, we examined some of the most common autoimmune diseases. In this episode, we're going to look at a group of diseases that have a dramatic impact on our society because of their high incidence, mortality, and severe debilitating character. Neurodegenerative diseases have now surpassed both cardiovascular disease and cancer in incidence rates. Though they haven't always been known as autoimmune diseases, they do show all the features, and the symptoms are just as debilitating. Now, if you're enjoying this series, if you're loving it, then make the decision today to own this series. When you own the series, then you're able to share it with loved ones for a lifetime to come. And there's many people that you've probably been thinking about during the whole series and thinking, this would be really good for that person and that person. If only that person could hear this. Well, they can hear about it, and it's through you. And by owning this resource, you can share it with them. We give even another free buddy pass as a bonus, so another friend can get full access to what we're offering there, and a very special discount during the time that this is airing. So just make the decision today so you can secure that with all the bonuses and support our mission, but most importantly, support your health and the health of your loved ones for a lifetime to come with resources that change and save lives. And Autoimmune Secrets is that resource. Thank you so much. Let's dive into the rest of this episode.
There's some underlying commonality between the advent of an autoimmune condition and a neurodegenerative condition. We know that because they both took off in the population in the same mid-1990s. When we changed our food chain, we eliminated the medicinal features largely from our food. We started to add toxins to the food that were going to destroy our gut lining. We started to see both the advent of this epidemic of autoimmune disease and the epidemics of the neurodegeneratives. And so there's definitely this underlying gut nutrition cause for it, and there's a very similar chronic degenerative, almost body attack inflammatory cascade that's happening down at the biology if you're looking at Alzheimer's dementia in a woman, Parkinson's in a male, or an autoimmune process in either one. And so I would absolutely say there is commonality in the pathophysiology and the symptoms that would emerge from it.
I actually have 3 medical degrees, which is way too many, an MD, a DO, and an NMD. And that's been quite a journey for a boy that couldn't sit in his seat in school. That's way too much education, but longevity, extension of life, and of course, we don't need an alive body if we don't have an alive mind, a healthy alive mind. So a critical part of life extension is a healthy, vital, vivacious mind that's fully aware and fully active. So yes, Alzheimer's is part of that treatment. I also treat cancer patients. Interestingly enough, they are very similar paths because longevity and getting us there's probably a 90% similarity between life extension and prevention of Alzheimer's and cancer treatment. It's just a matter of details and the difference. You know, the truth is we don't know all of the details about Alzheimer's. We thought it was tau formation, and we thought it was beta amyloid, and now the question is, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Or is the beta amyloid deposition the result of the disease process and the tau, or is it the primary incident? And it may be simply a reflection of the inflammatory process, of the process. So the truth is we don't know cause and effect yet. We know that beta amyloid shows up, but we know that there are people with healthy minds that have a lot of beta amyloid and tau on autopsy. What we've got to do is keep all the neuron connections, because each nerve fiber has a lot of different connections and cross connections, synapses. And when we lose those synapses, that's when we start to lose memory. And there's a lot of things involved in that process, from heavy metals to toxins to inflammation. So there's a lot involved in Alzheimer's. It's not a simple answer. It's a multifactorial disease. Atrophy of the brain is part of that process. And why is it atrophying? Is it simply a result of die-off of cells and aging, or is it a part of high glucose levels, because another name for Alzheimer's is diabetes type 3. And so we have to strongly consider the role that sugar plays in our high sugar diet. And let me define sugar for you. Sugar is bread, sugar is pasta, sugar is noodles, sugar is grains, oats, wheat, all of the grains. That includes corn, which of course includes corn chips. That includes potatoes and other starches, which of course includes potato chips. So if it's white or was white, essentially don't put it in your mouth unless it's cauliflower. That's probably the healthy white thing that we can put in our mouth. Maybe a little jicama, but essentially we need to avoid grains and starches like the plague. And a menstrual, there's some primary things: diet, and we'll cover that extensively in a minute, exercise, and then nutritionals, you can separate those from your diet if you want, and then supplements and active, aggressive medical treatment. Let's be very clear though, if you go on the internet, Alzheimer's, not preventable, irreversible, and all of that is simply not the truth. Alzheimer's is absolutely preventable. Alzheimer's is reversible up to stage 5. There's 7 stages of Alzheimer's. Even stage 6, we can hold the line and prevent progression. Stage 5, we can roll Alzheimer's back and regain some of that memory. So Alzheimer's is absolutely preventable and is to a significant degree reversible. Diet is your number one thing. Diet is critical. So we briefly mentioned that when we talked about it being another name as diabetes type 3. So avoiding sugar and sugar spikes. Sugar spikes cause Alzheimer's, sugar spikes cause diabetes, sugar spikes cause cancer. Many, not singularly, but one of the factors. And so what is a sugar spike? A sugar spike is when we eat a certain substance and it spikes the blood sugar more than 20 points. So this is critical in my treatment of Alzheimer's patients and cancer patients and in preventing aging, everything that I do. So I'll actually tell my patients, go to the local pharmacy and get a blood sugar meter. Check your blood sugar, eat the bowl of whatever you're going to eat, quinoa or corn or potatoes or fruit or whatever. Set your timer for 20 minutes and check your blood sugar again. If your blood sugar went up over 20 points, you can't eat that. That's causing a sugar spike. Sugar spikes cause damage everywhere, from the brain to the pancreas to our little bitty blood vessels, our capillaries, nerves, sugar feeding cancer cells. Sugar spikes are one of the unhealthiest things that we can do in life.
I'd like to talk about AIS. What is AIS? It's an acronym for Advanced Glycation End Products. A big term. What is glycation? Glycation is a non-enzymatic glycosylation reaction in which sugars are covalently bonded with either proteins or lipids. When this bonding takes place, then we form a product called glycotoxins that are now, when they're ingested in our body, they're not able to be broken down or digested or absorbed in our body. Food normally has very low AIS in our body. But what happens when we increase AIS, and how do we increase AIS in our body? We can do this by overcooking our food, grilling our food, deep frying our food. So when we do any of these things, we're increasing the AIS in our body. For example, 1 serving of raw chicken has 800 AIS in our body. But when we have fried chicken now, deep fried chicken or Kentucky fried chicken or any kind of fried chicken in our body, now we have 8,000 IUs of AIS in our body. And this, when ingested, it's not being absorbed or digested, and so it accumulates in our body. Much research has been done in AIS and has been shown to be one of the causes of diabetes and cardiovascular diseases. And now new research has found that AIS also is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. A study was done in 2014 on mice, on 3 different kinds of mice. One which were given a diet of low ages, and one with high ages, and one normally. And the mice that were given the high ages had a very decreased cognitive decline. The same study was again repeated on healthy humans ages 60 and above, and the people who had high ages diet were shown to have have been shown to have a cognitive decline in their brain cells and basically in all of their cognition. So that's why ages is not a really healthy way of eating our food. So how do we change that? Ages has been found to be naturally derived and high in animal-derived products like beef, chicken, fish, any kind of ham. All of these animal-derived products have a naturally increased amount of ages. But foods that are carbohydrate-rich, like vegetables, fruit, legumes, have been found to have very low ages in our body. And when animal-derived foods now are added with foods like butter or mayo and all of that, we're adding more ages in our body. And when we grill it and we deep fry it or overcook it, we're just increasing the amount of ages in our body. So an alternative to that would be to inhibit or stop grilling or decrease the amount of grilling or overcooking our food, but we can use poaching, we can use blanching, we can use baking of our foods. Another study was found out on heterocycloamines, which are actually substances that are released when we actually grill our food. And what happens when we grill our food is we form all of these toxic substances called HCAs or heterocycloamines, and studies were done on which we added spices to decrease or inhibit that. Some of the studies have proved that turmeric, cilantro, cumin, rosemary, all of these substances actually inhibited the HCAs, and that's why it made our food more palatable and nutritious to eat even after we grill them. So that's one way we could grill our meat if you want to decrease our ages in our body. Very fascinating study was done on avocados. When one slice of burger is ingested in our body with a patty of, say, some kind of meat, either a beef or chicken, and when it's ingested in our body, 2 hours later, we actually have vasoconstriction in our body, and an inflammatory substance called interleukin-6 is increased in our body. But to that same burger, if half an avocado is added, this did not take place, and there is actually inhibition of the triglycerides that are formed, or the vasoconstriction, or the inflammatory amines that are formed in our body after you ingest the burger along with avocados. So there are easier changes that we can do for food that we're already eating. But the best approach is to decrease or limit our animal intake and actually increase our vegetables, fruits, and legume intake to decrease ages in our body.
Another critical element in diet is when not to eat, because we not only want to be eating the right things, but fasting is a lost art in America. All through the centuries, since the creation, we have fasted. It's been a major spiritual practice, but it is also an extremely healthy practice. Fasting allows immune senescence to happen, and that's kind of hard to grasp, but when I stubbed my toe on the boardwalk when I was 5 years old and got a little bacteria in there, my immune system mounted a response against those bacteria. And ever since then, I've had immune cells sitting around waiting on that bacteria to show up again. So here's a bacteria and here's the immune system, and it comes in and it discovers that antigen, and then the rest of its life it's going around looking for that one thing. And so if we don't ever incur that one thing again, then our immune system is just inactive. It's on the, if you want to use a athletic metaphor, they're on the sidelines. They're in the dugout. They're on the bench. They're out of the game. They're not out there playing. They're not active. And so fasting allows natural immune senescence in a healthy way because it allows your body to purge itself of some of those old cells. So probably upwards of 90% of our immune system is sitting on the sideline waiting for that one thing to show back up that we were exposed to when we were 1 year old or 5 years old or 10 years old. And if it's never going to show up again, then it's just that part of our immune system is not functioning. So it allows the purging of some of those old cells, and then your immune system creates new vibrant stem cells that haven't identified anything, and now they're looking for that new cancer cell or that new fungus or virus, and they can react to it. So fasting is a health practice. It's not just a spiritual practice, which I encourage that too, but it's an amazing health practice. So what does that look like on a daily basis? We should be fasting for 16 to 18 hours without food. On a monthly basis, a 3-day fast, water only, and you say, oh, I can't do that. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Diabetics can do it, and anyone can do this. You have to set your mind to it and be firmly intentional. Water only fast, preferably 72 hours, but no less than 48 hours. And again, lots of fluid because you're purging things and you want to have a good washout. So fasting is very important for keeping a healthy mind, keeping a healthy body. And we talked about elimination of starches and grains. Mediterranean diet, you know, we've always wondered how the French, the Italians, the Greeks could drink like fish and smoke like fiends and have less cardiac disease than we could. Well, they're eating a healthy diet. They're eating fresh greens or lots of olive oil. They're eating a lot of healthy things. Peas, you know, they're having nuts. They're doing healthy foods. The fresher the food, the better. So you want fresh food. You want organic for sure. You don't want any artificial chemicals or fertilizers or pesticides. And absolutely no GMOs. GMOs are pesticides that have been incorporated into the food to kill animals, preferably insects, but you're an animal in that sense on a physiological basis. So you're taking these toxins that are made to kill animals into your body, and they're damaging you. So GMOs are absolute non-starters. Avoid those like the plague also. So Mediterranean diet, no GMOs, organic. If you can't afford organic, at least bring your food home and wash it off in the sink in hydrogen peroxide to kind of decontaminate the pesticides and that type of chemical, that residue that might be on them. Hydration is critical. People don't comprehend it. You know, first of all, you're washing out toxins nicely, but DNA, for DNA to happen all day long, our cells are making DNA. Well, DNA looks like a rubber band wad inside of a cell and inside of the nucleus and inside of the mitochondria, and it literally has to unfold and string out for it to be copied to create new structure, to create animals, whatever the cell, the body is creating, the cell is creating from that DNA, and then after it gets translated, it wads back up. Well, it can't, if things are dehydrated and it's compressed in there, it can't untangle itself, and so it needs liquid is the medium in which everything happens in the body. So it has to be able to untangle. And then after, you know, the body is small factories. Cells are small factories. So after they manufacture their stuff, there's waste products. And we don't have a little blood vessel coming from every cell, so that the cell throws the trash right outside the door, which is not a good situation. But that's carried off by the lymph fluid. People don't understand what lymph fluid is. It's waste from cellular debris, and that gets carried back into the blood system and recirculates. So we need lots of fluid for inside of the cell, for outside of the cell to dispose of waste products. So hydration is critical, and you want to hydrate with healthy water. So that is absolutely not tap water. That's not water in plastic bottles, which is mostly tap water if you do the research. And now it's set in plastic for weeks or months with all the chemicals in plastic. So fresh water that's cleansed with activated charcoal and other substances, preferably right in your own home, and stored in glass. I use a glass bottle if I'm going outside or away traveling to put my fresh water in. Slightly alkaline, mineralized, critical, If you're going to have reverse osmosis water, you have to have remineralization on there, because the life of the water is minerals. That's how everything works inside our body, is minerals. Electric lights, the nerves can't work without minerals. We can't even make adrenaline or cortisol or mineralocorticoids, any of those without minerals. So minerals is a critical element. Avocados are a great source of healthy oil. I personally drink 3 to 4 ounces of extra virgin olive oil a day. In the afternoon, when I start getting a little brain fog, I will take extra virgin coconut oil, because it is brain food. You can feed your brain directly. Your brain can burn those medium chain triglycerides. Healthy fats are critical. We've been told to stay away from fat, and that is deadly. Fats are not only essential for life, they are primary fuel sources, and there couldn't be anything healthier than healthy fats. We have to have healthy, vital, fresh oils to cook in, to eat on our salads, so no artificial oils. We must avoid trans fats at all costs, because it's part of the structure. Our body's building new cells every day. And so whatever we have on board, it's building new cellular structure. And if all it has is broken material, it builds the cells out of that broken material, but then the cells leak. They aren't healthy. So those trans fats are the wrong structure. They don't fit together well. It's like having a tile roof and some of the tiles turned upside down and some of them sideways. It's not doing the job. And so we've got to have healthy fats to build the structure out of, and that's natural. Olive oil, avocados, coconut oil, almond oil, all those healthy oils that we should be eating fresh, raw, from nature.
Let's address this low-fat myth that we talk about of having low-fat diets. Fats are required for our human body for a lot of different processes. It's very useful for producing all the hormones in our body, for cholesterol synthesis, for nervous system in our body. It is actually the lining for all our cells and cell membranes. So fat is an essential element that is required for our body. But when we're eating less or low fat diet, we're not getting the adequate amount of fat that is required for all the body functions. There are different kinds of fats. There is 2 different kinds. There's the saturated fats and the unsaturated fats. Most of the saturated fats are animal-derived fats like lard, etc. Or it could be coconut fat, coconut oil. Most of the fats that are saturated are solid at room temperature. And then there is the unsaturated fats, which could either be monounsaturated fats, MUFAs, or polyunsaturated fats. And these can be from olive oil, sesame seed oil, rapeseed oil, safflower oil. All of these oils are mostly plant-derived oils, or the unsaturated fatty acids that we can ingest. So let's look at olden times of how fat was actually done. When butter was created, it was just milk, or the cream of milk was churned and then created butter, which did not have any additives, any preservatives, didn't go through any processes or large vats to actually produce the commercial butter that we had. A similar way, olives were they're threshed together, they were put in large vats that were again threshed together, dehusked, oils were removed, crude oil, and then again separated manually without any hydrogenation done in it. Again, what is hydrogenation? Hydrogenation just means addition of hydrogen gas into oils in a vacuum that would actually preserve all the oil that is produced. So trans fat is basically hydrogenated oil, which is not really required by our body, or neither can it be absorbed or digested well in our body. So that's why trans fats by itself is not required or useful for our body. But our body needs both the saturated fats and the unsaturated fats. Now, when we actually get the unsaturated fats, it's very easy for the oil to get rancid or spoiled quickly. And the factors that can cause it could be air, light, or heat. And that's why when we purchase something like olive oil, we're looking for something that is cold pressed, And then when we get it, we want to store it in a container that is dark bottled and away from sunlight or away from any kind of light and tightly sealed. So now we're not allowing any air, any heat, or any light to penetrate and make the oil rancid. Then we want to talk about what smoking point is. What is smoking point? Smoking point is when the oils are heated to a certain level where now it's no longer stable or it becomes oxidized. When it's oxidized, that again is toxic to our body. Different oils have different smoke points. And if we know the smoke points of the oil, we can actually use the oil that we purchase to the best use. All oils have different smoke points. Some oils have a very low smoking point, like flaxseed oil, canola oil, corn oil. All of these smoking points are 225 Fahrenheit. That means when you heat your oil or heat the oil that's in a vessel to 225 or higher, then the oil becomes oxidized or it's not stable anymore, and that's when it produces toxins. So these oils are best used when you're not heating your food to that much of a high temperature. But there are certain oils that you can go up to higher levels. So coconut oil is one of the oils that you can go up to like 300, 350. Avocado oil has been found to go up to 400 degree Fahrenheit. And then clarified butter, also known as ghee, can go up to 500 degree Fahrenheit. So when you're actually cooking some food that needs very high temperatures to actually be cooked, it's good to use an oil that has a high smoking point so it does not become oxidized and unstable, and the food now is good for you to eat because the oils there are not rancid, they're not oxidized, and they're easily digested by our body. So fat by itself is not a bad thing to ingest. It depends on where the fat's coming from, how you're ingesting it, how you're preparing your food, how high the temperature you're cooking your food in, and that way you can actually eat the right kind of fat and the right kind of food.
And just again to mention about carbs, we talked about carbs, what they were, what sugar was, and again, we've been on a carbohydrate craze in America because of ill advice from the medical establishment and the agricultural department encouraging us to eat those things, because that's what pushes forward from industry in America. So the diet looks like vegetables is number one, number two is vegetables, and number three is vegetables. And then we can talk about nuts, low glycemic fruits. Just go online and look at low glycemic index fruits. And so many fruits today are bred for sugar content because that's what we crave in America. We crave sugar, and that's what our taste buds have been raised on. So look at a glycemic index of fruits, and you can eat the low glycemic index fruits, but avoid the high glycemic index fruits. Avoid sweet, avoid corn sugar, avoid sugars of all sorts. That's what the low-carb diet looks like in a nutshell. No pun intended. Exercise is another one of those critical elements for the brain, for the body. There has never been a study done on exercise that showed it any detriment, and any study that I've ever read showed an improvement in whatever it was, from Alzheimer's to heart disease, to atherosclerosis, to diabetes. There is nothing that exercise doesn't help. So what does exercise look like? That looks like 30 minutes a day, preferably, absolutely not in less than 30 minutes 3 times a week, of relatively intense exercise. For instance, there was a recent study that came out that men that had prostate cancer had 60% less progression if they had vigorous exercise for 30 minutes or more for 3 times a week. So vigor is part of that equation. So getting your heart rate up to 150 if you're under 50, 140 if you're over 60, 130 if you're 70. So that heart rate goal goes down as we age a little bit. But getting your heart rate up nicely, sustained for a significant period of time, at least 30 minutes, at a bare minimum of 3 times a week, is critical. I mentioned lymph a few minutes ago. people don't understand what lymph is. We have a vascular system. We have arteries and veins, and that's one continuous system. And then we have lymphatic vessels. Well, okay, what is that? Lymphatic vessels are actually an open-ended vascular system. So it just kind of ends out there in the tissues, the muscles, the glands, and then it forms into vessels. It has no muscles in the wall. So lymph doesn't move unless you move. And remember what lymph is? Lymph is waste material. If you've ever been in a city with a garbage strike, it only takes about 3 days for everybody to cave in because it really becomes a health hazard very rapidly. And so our cells are throwing the garbage right outside the cells. It's being carried off by the lymph. You do not want that garbage right around the cells. It's toxic stuff. Nice medical term, stuff. And so that lymph only gets carried away with adequate amounts of hydration and movement, because it's the muscles, it's the organs. When you move, it squeezes the lymph. Now the lymph vessels do have valves to prevent it from backflowing in the tissues, but you've got to squeeze it up to the next valve. So motion is critical. Exercise is critical to health in every realm, from the brain to the heart to the organs to the muscles. And so exercise, absolutely cornerstone.
I'm writing a book about this. The book is titled Alzheimer's is Not a Disease, which it isn't. It isn't a disease. And it's the end stage, nothing unexpected about it, nothing unpredicted about it, of a long, decades-long progression, negative change, progression, that ultimately results in a catastrophe. And as soon as they called it a disease, 12 years ago, they put everybody off on thinking that when you have it, you treat it, as opposed to how you should think about it, and that's to stop the decades-long progression. That's really how you should be dealing with it. You should be stopping it from ever happening in life. But we don't think about it that way in the mainstream of medicine.
Do you believe that Alzheimer's can be prevented?
Oh, absolutely. No question. Or you could say delayed for probably indefinitely in most people. But I also think that when you do that, the changes that you drive in the brain will lead to substantial increases of longevity.
Bernardo Lapello is one of the longest lived guys right now. He's 115, I believe, and he's in Arizona. He's been on plant-based whole food nutrition for all of his life. He wrote a book, Living Beyond 100, and it's quite an inspiration. He exercises, wakes up in the morning, and drinks fresh water, eats a lot of fresh fruit, and he has that positive mental attitude. He rubs some oil on his skin rather than consuming it, and that keeps his skin protected from the sun and things. But I think that we can learn from this. My goal is to be the longest lived individual in history. In 60 years, I'll be 123, and I plan to have sex on my 123rd birthday to prove that you can live a longer, better quality life. And you're right, people don't want to live a long time because their view of someone past 100 is they're decrepit, they're in a wheelchair, they can barely function, they're drooling, And really, if you look at the studies about Alzheimer's, you mentioned that at some point, and senile dementia, it's interesting that in the NUN study, there was a classic study reported in Brain Fitness by Dr. Bob Goldman in his book. And what they identified was the nuns who were on a plant-based whole foods nutrition throughout their entire life. Their brain function was perfect. They never developed Alzheimer's. They didn't develop dementia. In the group of nuns who were eating meat, cheese, eggs, and dairy product, the incidence of Alzheimer's and dementia was statistically similar to the rest of the population. So here's a group away from stress. They didn't really have to worry about a job. Basically under the same conditions, the only difference was their diet. The same as the Trappist monks and Benedictine monks. Same thing, plant-based versus animal-based. The plant-based monks, away from stress, lived longer, less disease, little or no cancer, heart disease, brain function, excellent. Even Dr. Alzheimer, if you read the original literature, stated that the Alzheimer's condition, and it was Dr. Alzheimer who stated this, was found in people who ate a lot of animal product. They had high LDL, low density lipoprotein cholesterol. That cholesterol clogged up the arteries to the brain, and when it reduces circulation in the brain, the small capillaries to the brain, that microcirculation, you can't think clearly.
Now, as a neurosurgeon, I have the privilege of being able to actually see into people's brains. And in the early days of neurosurgery, when we had to operate on a brain, we used to make a large window in the skull so we could see a large part of the brain. The advantage to seeing the brain, you realize when you see portions of the brain with your naked eye and see yourself actually taking parts of that brain out and then seeing the patient recover, you suddenly recognize that other parts of the brain are capable of taking over some of the functions that have been lost by the hemorrhage or by the surgical intervention. And that is all due to the brain's plasticity. So as a neurosurgeon, I've always had a great receptivity to this concept of plasticity. One of the most remarkable things that affected a lot of my career later on was during my training years. As a young surgeon, a resident, we used to do rounds on the patients in the hospital. And the professor would stop in front of a bed and ask the group questions about the patient. Talk to us about the patient, what was wrong with the patient, how would you treat this patient, and we'd do this from bed to bed. Except one bed, he'd always bypass it. And he would say, well, this woman's in a coma, we don't need to stop here. And that bothered me. She was a young woman, she must have been in her mid-30s. So after rounds and everybody dispersed, I'd come back to her bed and I'd sit by the bed and just watch her for a while. And I'd do this every day for about 20 minutes to half an hour. And one day I started talking to her. Got no response. And I tried this again. And then one day she opened her eyes and she looked at me. And it looked as though she was kind of aware that I was there. And this went on for several days, and then eventually I'd ask her questions, she'd start answering, yes, no. And within a few weeks she began talking. This by now, about 3 months had gone by. So I said to her, do you remember anything from the last weeks, days, months that you've been here? And she said, yes. I remember that damn professor saying I will never wake up. And I was determined to prove that he was wrong. Boy, that stuck with me. That's one of the things that led me into becoming a specialist on coma and coma arousal techniques. That was a very, very, very powerful moment. It's been very successful over the last 40 plus years. I think I brought thousands of people out of coma. Some of them doing very well, some of them only getting partially better, but living at home, having a different quality of life than if they had been sent to a nursing home. The techniques involve several modalities of approach. These have to be considered as total individuals, not just the brain. And even though we're treating the brain, we want the brain to recover, we have to treat the entire body. So to arouse somebody from a coma involves, number one, making sure they have appropriate nutrition. We're back to nutrition again. Number two, ensuring that they get sufficient movement, even if it's passive movement. Passive movement means having a therapist come in or a relative come in and exercise their limbs so they don't tighten up on them. And then, very importantly, program of what I call multisensory stimulation, using the different senses in the body to stimulate all the different senses in a very systematic fashion, one after another, and repeating that over and over again, multiple times a day. Doing this until you start getting responses, and then when you start getting responses, depending on the response, you change that modality of stimulation. Just to give you an example, an individual who's lying in bed in a coma, who's not opening or moving their eyes, you might hold an eye open and shine a very bright light into it repeatedly, just a very brief flash, until you get a reaction. The way one normally sees a reaction to bright light is that the pupil, which is the dark part of the eye, constricts. Just like when we're out in bright light, the back of the eye becomes very small, becomes pinpoint. When you get that reaction, then you can start shifting to less bright lights, then presenting them with black and white images, and progress the sensory stimulation depending on how they're progressing. Same with the hearing, same with the sense of taste, same with the tactile senses. So it's a progressive program that's tailored to the level of response.
It's been over the last 5 years that we have seen patient after patient after patient who actually has devastation in their lives or devastation in their families. and who has done very well. And it's just hearing those stories again and again, which has been so exciting. We had one guy who said that he has allowed himself to think about the future and to talk about the future with his grandchildren once again. He had actually stopped because he wouldn't talk to them about the future because he knew that he would not be part of it. And now he's allowed himself to do that. We had another woman who said that her husband is an excellent guitarist, and he had lost that ability, and that he now got the nuance in his guitar playing back again. Another woman who actually had lost her ability to play the piano, and that came back. A woman who lost her ability to speak a foreign language, which she had been very good at when she was young. She actually learned to speak both Chinese and Russian, and these started to come back as she improved. So the stories are just heartwarming and very exciting to hear. And of course, from the other parts of the family member, one girl said that her mother had become part of the family once again. So these are really exciting to hear. It means that the science that we've all been working on for so many years really can change the world. It really means that the things that we're looking at in the test tubes and the various DNA base pairs that we've talked about, and the molecular genetics that we've all studied for years, the whole molecular biology revolution is leading us to real answers that impact human lives all over the world. That's very exciting.
Well, originally I was diagnosed with some major damage to the white matter in my brain, and I can go into the details about that in just a bit. I also had a serious cardiac condition. My whole body hurt. I was obese, I was forgetful, and I was emotionally out of control.
Wow. And so tell me more about this condition with your brain. How serious was that?
That was serious enough that I couldn't remember a telephone number from looking at it on a piece of paper to being able to dial it on the phone. Today I'm able to, and if this were not being recorded, I could recite to you the 16 digits on my debit card. And I never set out to memorize those. I now not only have my vocabulary back, but I can memorize numbers, and I know where I'm going, and I know when I get into a room what I'm there for. I didn't know that before. I was lost in my own home. I was lost in my own brain.
Wow, how long did you experience that for?
It was getting progressively worse over probably 3 or 4, maybe 5 years. I've been a professional healthcare provider for all of my adult life, and I saw what happened to people that lost their brains, or they lost the ability to use what was in their brains. And that was exactly what was happening to me. It was like I was standing outside a library. The door was locked. I knew where that book was inside, but I couldn't get to it. I knew the information was in that book, but I couldn't approach it. The door was locked. I couldn't get to it.
How did that feel for you?
I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. Where was this leading me? This is very emotional for me.
And it sounds like you weren't ready to go.
Oh no. Oh no, I've got lots of living to do yet. Lots of living.
It was quite quickly after she got out of the hospital. It wasn't, she knew what was going on. It wasn't like it wasn't from like an outside looking in. She realized that she was having some memory problems as well, and we would have conversations, and then about 3 hours later, she'd forget what I had talked to her about, which can be heartbreaking, frustrating, upsetting, all those kinds of things when you see a family member that's kind of suffering a little bit. But yeah, it was really just the dementia. It was really just the memory. She couldn't remember just the little things. It wasn't like she'd completely forget hours and hours of time, but it was enough to really affect her lifestyle and the family dynamic for sure.
And did you see future images of her declining and being like losing cognition?
I mean, at that point, I wasn't looking. I didn't really have a medical education at that point. I was still in my undergraduate, doing my undergraduate at the University of Manitoba. So I wasn't really looking long term. I was kind of that selfish 18-year-old that was kind of being like, "Mom, you're not listening to me. What's going on with you?" So it was scary, but I wasn't really looking long term. Now, knowing what I know about dementia, it would have been terrifying. So sometimes ignorance can be bliss, I think.
Tell me how your mother turned her situation around.
Well, she saw her naturopathic doctor. They ran a whole bunch of tests, and they found that she had a vitamin B12 deficiency, which is super easy to fix, thank God. So within 2 weeks, she was back to normal. She was doing vitamin B12 shots twice a week intramuscularly, and within that she still does them, but within that 2 weeks, she was back to just the amazing person that she is. So that was fantastic. It was like magic. It was really cool, actually, to see. Yeah.
That's bringing up emotion for you. What is
it?
It
is, yeah, it is. I don't know. It's just, sorry. Knowing what I know now about dementia and how it affects the person as well as the family, it's scary. So I'm glad that there was a simple solution to such a complicated problem.
Yeah.
Selfish relief, just seeing where she was and how easy it was for her to bounce back. It's that relief, because knowing what I know now, and seeing and having seen people go through what dementia actually does to a person, really, it's really scary and it's really heartbreaking. So I'm just glad that I got my mom back.
Alzheimer's is a degenerative condition of the brain which affects a person's ability to remember. They lose their memory. They lose their short-term memory, and then with time they lose all memory altogether. And Alzheimer's is a deadly condition. It can be fatal. As the brain degenerates, so does control of bodily functions, and when it gets to a certain point, it can be fatal. Talk about the brain. Let's talk about what affects the brain by way of degeneration. What causes the brain to start to fall apart like this? Let's see what different contributing factors that we know exist here. So number one is nutritional deficiency. Okay, in Alzheimer's, you have brains that are devoid of very key nutrients like essential fatty acids, B vitamins, certain minerals. There are in conjunction with the nutritional deficiencies, there's also increased amounts of heavy metals that are deposited in the brains of people with Alzheimer's. And these heavy metal deposits seem to be the major contributing factor to the amyloid protein deposits that happen in the brains of people with Alzheimer's. My favorite analogy of what heavy metals do to tissues is heavy metals do to your cells what a splinter does to the bottom of your foot. Okay? Consider a splinter stuck into your foot. Okay? It hurts, causes inflammation, it causes infection, causes irritation, and the area swells up and it gets all irritated, infected, inflamed, all at one time, right? So let me give you an analogy here. Heavy metals affect your cells the same way a sliver would affect the bottom of your foot. Okay, if you have a sliver in the bottom of your foot, it causes irritation and inflammation, and then infection. Infection sets in, right? And you have this cycle as the infection clears up, your immune system clears that up, reduces the inflammation, the irritation is still there, so with time it becomes inflamed again, then it gets infected again, and then, that whole cycle just keeps going and going and going as long as the sliver's there. Well, until you pull the sliver out, you're going to have irritation, you're going to have inflammation, you're going to have infection. It's going to be a cycle. You're going to just continually get these three I's, as I call them. In your cells, similar thing happens if they're toxic with heavy metals. Heavy metals act as that irritant and keep causing the cells to become inflamed. And as they become inflamed, they become more easy to infect. And when they become infected, they die off. Okay? And this same process happens in all of our cells. If our cells, all of our cells, whether they're neurons in our brain or, tissue in our finger, that process will go on if they are toxic. Okay? There's two particular heavy metal toxin compounds that massively affect our brains and nervous system. One is the combination of fluoride and mercury. Okay. The other one is the combination of fluoride and aluminum. And these compounds, when they come into contact with each other and create a compound in our body, and they float up into our brain, they cause neuron death. Okay, they kill brain cells. And as they kill those brain cells, proteins are deposited in those areas, and we have what are called the amyloid protein deposits. And those amyloid protein deposits don't contain memories, and they don't allow us to access memories either. And so they cause memory dysfunction, and we call that Alzheimer's disease. Okay, that's one of the methods, one of the processes that can cause Alzheimer's. There is a autoimmune, quote unquote, component to Alzheimer's, where there's such inflammation in the brain that as the immune system is trying to clean up the inflammation, it actually does cause damage to the brain. And then when we have this process, or have this condition where we have nutritional deficiencies and these toxicities, particularly heavy metal toxicities, it affects the brain deeper and deeper and deeper. And the longer that goes on, the more damage that occurs in the brain. And we end up with memory issues.
When I'm looking at the brain, not only considering the gut, but also like what's actually inflaming the brain outside of that. You want to look at toxins. A couple toxins that specifically affect the brain: aluminum, which is a modern day epidemic right now. Even the bioengineering of dropping the stratospheric bioengineering, chemtrails people call it, but aluminum in there to try to reflect some of the sun, so we're not, having damaging effects from the sun. Like, aluminum exposure is everywhere. So aluminum loves the brain. Mercury loves the brain as well too. So if you have dental amalgam fillings with mercury inside, we know there's going to be a certain amount of mercury in the brain for every amalgam that you have and for a certain time period.
But what about just ingesting raw vegetables? What kind of vegetables do we really use, and why do we use vegetables? So when we have an autoimmune disease, it's not just the inflammation in our body that we're worried about. We're worried about different things. We're talking about a body that is hot, on fire, burning with all of these toxins that have nowhere to go. So we need to help our body eliminate and expel these toxins. And our body is designed in such a beautiful way that we can eliminate toxins in so many different things. One of the most common, the most important detoxifying organ in our body is the liver. And liver helps detoxify a lot of different reactions in our body. All the food that's absorbed, all the foods that are digested, then goes through the liver to be eliminated through the gut. Another way we can detoxify our toxins is through the kidney. And so that's when we use diuretics, where we're eliminating all of that in our urine. And then, of course, you're detoxifying through your gut when you're actually having a bowel movement. And one of the largest organs in our body is the skin. It's present from head to foot all over. And to detoxify toxins from the skin, we use the herbs that are diaphoretic. That means just eliminating it through the skin. So let me just talk about a few herbs that we can use by detoxifying out of the liver. And there are plenty of herbs. One of my favorite herbs is milk thistle, also called Silybum marianum in Latin. It's a herb that's been present for centuries. Silybum has been used because it's called milk thistle because of the milky fluid you get when you actually extract the herb or the stem. You can use the seeds, you can use the stem, you can use the leaves. Silybum or milk thistle herbs grow everywhere as a weed, and then you can purchase it at different grocery stores and actually make greens out of it. Use it to make salads. You can use it in your stews, in your soups, in your cooked vegetables, and you can just add this. But a large quantity of Silybum is required to actually help detoxify your liver, and not just a small quantity. But using it as an supplement in addition to food is always essential, because you're actually also creating enzymes because of the bitterness of milk thistle that actually helps our enzymes that are produced to absorb or digest food. When we eat food and when we salivate, immediately our body is like producing all of these enzymes that we need to digest our food. And when we ingest bitters, milk thistle is one of those bitters that we can use. Another bitter we could use is taraxacum or dandelion. And when we ingest and we use all of these bitters in our body, we're actually releasing all of these enzymes that help to get hold of the food that we're ingesting, break it down so we're digesting it, and then absorb it into different parts of our body. Milk thistle is a herb that is actually used very frequently in helping eliminate toxins through the liver. So high quantities of milk thistle is what we talk about ingesting. So milk thistle can be, like I said, used in food as a raw vegetable. You could use the seeds, or you can use the extract as a supplement or a capsule or a tincture. And then ingesting high amounts of that will actually boost our liver or give it a push and say, okay, here I will help you eliminate the food. One other herb that I like is dandelion. Dandelion is a very common herb, and I'm sure you've seen it when you go hiking, you go outside, you walk around. It's an herb that is present anywhere, and if you just Google how the dandelion leaves look or the way the roots look, you would know that you've seen this so many places. This is a very peppery and bitter herb that is used. And when I talk about salads, when we talk about salads in general, the only things we're thinking about with salad is like lettuce and tomatoes and cucumbers. But we can make our salads so much more delicious by adding different kinds of herbs that not just satisfy or fill our bellies, but also help with nutrient-dense food. Again, what is nutrient-dense food? Nutrient-dense food is herbs or plants or whole grains that we're actually consuming that have very high nutrition in them, as opposed to empty calories. Sometimes we need to ingest foods that have empty calories that actually use up more fiber and roughage in our body. One of the herbs for that is like lettuce. We eat a lot of lettuce and it kind of bulks up in our body, and then this actually helps fiber, and it helps with constipation by increasing the fiber in our body, and has this bulking up of our stool to actually have a clear bowel movement. But then when we eat something like a nutrient-dense food, we're not just getting bulking up or fiber in our body, but we're also ingesting all different kinds of nutrients. And so coming back to dandelions are very, very high in vitamin K, in vitamin A, in vitamin C. And all of these are really required in all the different detox reactions we have in our body in eliminating food. Also, because it's a dark green leafy vegetable, it has a high iron content. And when you have high iron in our body, that also helps with all the different reactions that are helpful in not only creating blood, but also purifying blood. And then in that same process, eliminating the toxins from the blood into our stool.
Well, Alzheimer's is a pretty tough one, right? Once it's set in, it is pretty tough to get it under control. So the main thing is prevention. Just like every other manifestation of overconsumption of sugar, right, is to really get diligent about it. Okay, now how do you do that, right? Managing our sugar intake is an emotional commitment. Everywhere we go, we are surrounded by sugar. You're driving down the road, every convenience store is full of sugar. It is just ever present in our environment, right? So people are using sugar for emotional comfort, for celebrations, for how to escape from sadness and depression. And so really, I believe the first step of managing our sugar addiction is to increase our emotional IQ, to really work with a spiritual practice, work with a therapist if that's helpful to you, work with stress management, start to find other ways to comfort ourselves besides sugary substances. And that gives us a clearer choice over eating foods that are really nourishing. It's all about the prevention when it comes to sugar.
And do you think that that leads to a happier life?
It's an interesting question, right? I think it leads to a life with less disease, which in the long run definitely leads to a happier life. When somebody has cancer or advanced diabetes or Alzheimer's, the question of being happy is really not the main issue anymore, right? Now it becomes a matter of, am I going to live or die? Right, so this is the tricky thing about sugar. Most people love eating sugar. It makes them feel happy, right? Why is that? It's because it releases endorphins, right? These are biochemical brain chemistry that gives us the perception of happiness. So the more we can find other sources of joy that are not linked to sugar, dancing, learning to play music, all of the types of entertainment that our grandparents enjoyed that are non-electronic, that are not going to add stress to our lives. Playing cards, playing dominoes, exercising, playing sports. All of these ways that we can find joy and raise our endorphins and create a sense of well-being without having to use sugar to create that is, I believe, the entry point to living a new life with a different sense of happiness, let's say.
And then, like, eating fruit is good or bad?
Well, fruit is an interesting one, right? So most people can do well and benefit from eating a couple of servings of fruit a day, right? Some people will be reactive to even that level of fructose, right? The main type of sugar in fruit being fructose, and that's processed directly by the liver. It puts a burden on the liver, and so if someone's liver is already stressed out, just the smallest amount of fruit might create an inflammatory response in the body. So I believe a lot of people overconsume fruit in their attempt to lose weight because we're all told to eat our fruits and vegetables, right? And of course that's better than high fructose corn syrup or all the packaged processed foods in the center part of the grocery store. But really the key is vegetables, right? Small amount of fruit, lots of vegetables, right? And healthy fats and appropriate amount of protein. It's the basics. It's really not that hard.
Let's talk real quick about sugar. Okay, sugar. It's interesting. The average person in the United States consumes almost 100 pounds of sugar a year. That's astronomical. That's massive amounts of calories in the form of sugar. Well, sugar is an essential nutrient. It's something our body does need. It doesn't need it in massive quantities, but it does need some of it. When we flood our system with sugar, okay, is very similar to flooding a car with fuel. Okay, our system will spit and sputter like a car that's flooded, quote unquote, with fuel will spit and sputter. Okay, so things don't operate as well. Okay, another thing that happens with excessive sugar intake is that our red blood cells start to crystallize. Okay, not only do they not carry oxygen and nutrients very well then, but they crystallize with sugar crystals, and they have kind of like barbs on them, or what I say, similar to prickers on a rose stem. Okay, that are protruding from the red blood cell. Okay, and as those crystallized red blood cells float around through the system, they tear up the blood vessels. They cut and damage our blood vessels. Okay, very, very, very damaging. And this is why folks with diabetes have such poor circulation. Okay, as their blood vessels have been tore up by these crystallized red blood cells, and they've got scarring in their blood vessels, and so the blood vessels don't expand and contract very well. Therefore, circulation gets reduced. The projections right now, we're filming in 2017. The projections are that by 2030, 50% of the U.S. population will have type 2 diabetes. Now, that being the case, type 2 diabetes is when the system has been flooded with sugar for so long. The cells no longer will accept sugar very well, and they do that by way of shutting down the insulin receptor sites. Okay, so you got this keyhole where insulin fits into. Okay, and what happens is when the cells have been so saturated with sugar, they close down the keyhole, and so the key doesn't fit into it anymore. Okay, and you get what we call insulin resistance. So insulin resistance, if that happens in your brain, protein starts getting deposited in the brain. These amyloid proteins that disrupt our recall ability and disrupt our memory, and you end up with a condition very similar to Alzheimer's. There is, they even call, some people call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes instead of type 2 or type 1, as they call it type 3 diabetes. And it's insulin resistance of the brain. Okay, and that's because the brain cells have been just chock full of sugar for so long, they don't want any more. Okay, and they lock the door by shutting down the keyhole, so the key can't fit in the hole anymore. The key being insulin. Okay, and so we become insulin resistant. That's a very bad thing, because the only food source, the only fuel source for our brain is sugar. Okay, so if we don't have enough sugar getting into the brain doesn't work well. Well, if it doesn't work well, think of all the different things, that only affects everything that the brain affects. So if you think of, what doesn't your brain affect? Your brain's your body's control center. And so it affects everything. Okay, so with Alzheimer's, there are the path for correcting Alzheimer's has to include a whole food organic diet. Okay, we have to get away from chemicals and pesticides and herbicides and things that are going to be pro-inflammatory. Okay, and let me just step over 1 minute. We'll come back to that thought here. Inflammation in our body will lead to insulin resistance. Okay, because inflammation in our cells will cause damage of the insulin receptor sites. So that keyhole for the insulin key to fit into, if we have too much inflammation in the cell, it can damage that keyhole. So instead of the keyhole being arranged like this, if the cell becomes oxidized because of too much sugar or because of too much inflammation, the keyhole can get tipped or turned or damaged in a way that the key doesn't fit into it anymore. Okay, so if it's supposed to be like this and the key fits in like this, if the keyhole gets tilted, the key can't fit into there. Okay, if it gets tilted this way, it can't fit in. If it gets tilted like this, the key just doesn't fit in. If the keyhole gets warped, the key doesn't fit in. Okay, all those things happen in the presence of inflammation. Okay, inflammation causes oxidation of those insulin receptor sites. And this is everywhere in the body that happens. So in the course of for correcting Alzheimer's, okay, if we were to remediate Alzheimer's, we have to regulate fuel, okay, and that would be your food. We have to regulate the amount of fuel coming in. What I do with Alzheimer's patients as far as diet goes is I have them eat, when they eat 2 parts vegetables. Okay, and these are greens, yellows, oranges, green vegetables, red vegetables, yellow vegetables, purple vegetables, okay. On their plate, 1/2 of their plate has to be vegetables. The other half is half protein and half fruit. So they have 2 parts vegetable at every meal, 1 part protein at every meal, and 1 part fruit at every meal. And this stabilizes their blood sugar. Okay, it brings it down to where it should be. It also maximizes the amount of nutrients, especially the brain protecting nutrients that they're getting from their food.
Should we get genetic testing to assess Alzheimer's risk?
Yeah. So my opinion is that we should all get genetic testing to assess our Alzheimer's risk, and also biochemical testing. So what we recommend is that everyone 45 years of age or over should have, just like you would get a colonoscopy when you're 50, you should get a cognoscopy when you're 45 or older. And so that would look at your biochemistry and genetics. It would look at your function with things like Brain HQ or online assessments of cognitive function. And it would, if you're symptomatic, look at your imaging studies. And so, of course, this would include your genetics, and there are many SNPs associated with Alzheimer's disease. Of course, the most important genetic association as a risk factor is ApoE, the epsilon 4 allele. If you have 0 copies, you have about a 9% chance during your lifetime of developing Alzheimer's. Single copy, about 30%. And if you're homozygous, 2 copies, then you have somewhere between a 50 and 90% chance of developing it. But in the past, people recommended not to check this because you couldn't do anything about it. We disagree with that now. There's a lot you can do about it, and there are a lot of studies coming out showing that there is effective prevention, such as the finger study that came out of Finland. And so in our own work shows that you can not only prevent but also reverse, especially early on, cognitive decline. So therefore we recommend that everybody be tested.
We haven't been able to fathom the depths of the brain. We don't even use 1% because of the synapses. There's 100 billion BET cells, and there's 10,000 synapses, and that means that the possibility is between 60 and 220 trillion possibilities. And we can't even think of that number, how big it is. I have to tell you this. If you've been alive for 1 million seconds, that's less than 2 weeks. It's just between 1 and 2 weeks. If you take 1 billion seconds, that's 32 years, but 1 trillion seconds is 32,000 years. So that puts it into perspective. And, you know, that's a wonderful thing to realize that we have all those possibilities, and now we know for sure, they did it in animal models, but now we know for sure that every day a person is making around 7,000 new brain cells. And they're going into the area of the hippocampus where there's memory, and they're going into the area of the amygdala where our emotions are and everything like that. And if you don't use them, and if you don't inculcate it, yeah, I mean, you're going to be able to do fantastic things. I had a patient that couldn't talk for 7 years. Her kids didn't even know that she was able to talk, but she was determined, and she was able to start talking. She would be a little bit slow on some of the words because she hadn't run into those in the past, and so she would, you know, she could explain what it is but she couldn't tell you what the word was. I mean, this is just wonderful.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's great. And so that does give a lot of hope for things like Alzheimer's and dementia. I mean,
oh yeah, that's the lecture I give. Alzheimer's is preventable, completely preventable, and a lot of it, the early Alzheimer's is reversible, because you dilate all those little tiny blood vessels up, and then those parts of the brain start functioning. When people come here, everybody gets a little bit of help from it, and some people get, it depends on where in the brain it is, but some people get dramatic results in that.
wow. And I think that the key with the blue zone of all these Seventh-day Adventist people that you've connected with and worked with, and you see people that have reached 100 years old, and you see they're doing it, they're not like, you know, I've seen them in interviews that I'm doing, and they're able to count things properly.
Well, one of the things is they have the Loma Linda Lopers, and they get all these people dressed in a pink, bright pink shirt, and on you know, like on Sunday you see all these people going by, and so there's their exercise. So that's why they chose Loma Linda, you know.
Oh yeah. But look at these guys and look at what they did. They had enormous community, right? So they're engaging their mind, their happy hormones, their laughter, their smiles. They were rigorous with having rest. They were rigorous, like, so they would mark a day, you know, once a week where they would not be working. They did that most of them all their lives. They were a part of these case study groups. They were adamant with nutrition. They were temperate. They wouldn't just overdo things. And then so they had these 8 different pillars that they were using for their health. What do you see as some really effective solutions as a clinician? What do you see as what people can do today to effectively prevent Alzheimer's and dementia, or to use these same strategies potentially to then turn back the clock as well if somebody's seeing the early onset or even the later onset of some of these things?
Yeah, I love healthy fats. You know, our brain is made of mostly cholesterol, which again then goes to our culture right now. What's happening, Jonathan, is your cholesterol's too high. You know, like we're just gonna pick the range we want and keep lowering that so that everybody eventually will be into the cholesterol lowering medication category, and we're going to lower your cholesterol, and the brain is mostly cholesterol. So when we lower that, we're literally, like, you know, taking cholesterol away from our body that could be used for health of our brain. So I see kind of a correlation between the statin drugs or the cholesterol lowering medication. You know, the more that goes up, then the more brain issues it seems like we're, you know, having right now.
Diet and lifestyle are extremely important. So DESS, you know, diet, exercise, sleep, and stress. Diet, very important, and there are several different approaches people have taken. Of course, the Mediterranean diet has gotten a lot of press and has had a very positive impact in terms of cognition. So all these usual things, you don't want to exceed somewhere, you know, around 0.8 grams per kilogram of protein. You don't want to have too much protein. So you want a largely plant-based with fasting 12 hours and 3 hours, and for the ApoE4 positive individuals, they often like to take it to 14 to 16 hours for the fasting at night to develop a situation biochemically in which you have optimum cognition and inhibition of continued decline. And then, of course, other lifestyle things. There are many. Exercise, absolutely critical. Turns out that beta-hydroxybutyrate, among other things, increases the transcription of brain-derived neurotrophic factor. There are other effects as well. And then, of course, many other salutary effects of exercise. Sleep. Sleep, of course, is just one thing after the other coming out about how critical it is. It is a time for brain cleansing. Getting enough sleep at night is absolutely critical for your cognition. And then, of course, stress. And coming back to sleep for a moment, about 75% of people who have sleep apnea are not diagnosed with sleep apnea. It's a critical contributor to cognitive decline. And stress. If you want to kill off some hippocampal neurons, run up your cortisol, you'll kill off some hippocampal neurons. So all these things are absolutely crucial, and I think that they've been under-recognized over the years for their important contributions that they make to what we ultimately call Alzheimer's disease.
Our next question was, does sleep deprivation affect Alzheimer's? Yes, it does. It can affect the development of Alzheimer's, and it can affect whether or not someone recovers from Alzheimer's. The major factor in that is the lack of melatonin. Okay, the hormone produced by our pineal gland, called melatonin, is extremely neuroprotective. Okay, it's one of the antioxidants our body produces. It's one of the most powerful antioxidants our body produces. It's growth hormone is the most powerful antioxidant our body produces. Next, we have it's neck and neck. We have melatonin and glutathione. And after that, we have catalase and we have superoxide dismutase. But your melatonin and your glutathione are about neck and neck as far as their power as antioxidants. And melatonin has a particularly beneficial effect on the nervous system in that it protects the nerves in the nervous system and the neurons from falling apart. It's an antioxidant to those particular cells and structures in our body. And if you're not sleeping, you're not getting that melatonin. Your body produces melatonin while you're sleeping. So if you're not sleeping, you're not producing the melatonin, you're not getting the beneficial protection from the melatonin. So yes, sleep deprivation will be a contributing factor to what's called neurodegeneration. Okay, so the degeneration of the nervous system, because that protecting chemical, that protecting hormone, melatonin, isn't there to protect things, so they are more prone to damage. What about sleep deprivation in young developing children or teenagers or young adults? Those are typically the years where we believe and feel that we're invincible. Nothing can hurt us, nothing can happen. We're fine, right? It takes. Here's an interesting fact. 90 days of getting less than 6 hours of sleep causes disruption in 700 different enzymatic systems in our body. Okay, causes those enzyme systems. The enzymes are they're the chemicals that cause the chemical reactions in our body for our body to function. Okay, there's 700 enzyme systems in our body that get affected by way of downregulation, meaning they don't work as well after only 90 days of sleep deprivation. Okay, most of those begin after only 30 days of sleep deprivation. Okay, so say you're working nights and you're going to school during the day and you're only sleeping 2-3 hours, 4 hours a day. And how many people are out there doing that? And so to stay awake, you're drinking energy drinks and coffee and all these other things, these stimulants, which some of them do provide vitamins and minerals, although they're synthetic vitamins and minerals. But their energy drinks cause an increase in the utilization of nutrients in your metabolism. Okay, so in order to keep that energy going, they have to use nutrients that are in your system, which causes you to become nutrient deficient way faster. Okay, so you put in an accelerant into the system. Okay, it speeds up how fast you burn through the nutrients that are in your diet or that are stored in your body. As that happens, if you don't replace those nutrients, okay, if those nutrients aren't replaced, you end up nutrient deficient. If you are nutrient deficient and you're exposed to toxins, you are a toxin sponge. I can't say that enough, okay? That's universal. Anyone that is nutrient deficient, they're deficient in basic nutrition. There's 73 nutrients that you need on a daily basis. If you're not getting those and you're being exposed to toxins, which we are in our environment, you are a toxin sponge. Those nutrients act as gatekeepers, okay? They keep the toxins from coming in. And so if we don't have those nutrients, the toxins just come in, okay? And if we're using accelerants or stimulants in our diet in order to stay awake because we're not getting enough sleep, we're burning the candle at both ends. Problems will occur. It's not they might or might not, they will at some point. We have to eliminate accumulated waste in the body in order to reduce inflammation in the body. As long as there's waste that's accumulating in the body, you have two things happening. One, the waste itself will cause inflammation. Two, the waste is going to be very attractive to pathologic microorganisms. Okay, so all the bugs that cause infection like the waste that accumulates in our system. So if we want to reduce inflammation, we got to eliminate waste. Okay, and that's cleansing the colon, cleansing the liver and kidneys, cleansing the lymphatic system. Those types of things have to happen. And once we've done that, then we have to start working on heavy metal and chemical detoxification. Okay, there are things like selenium and iodine and magnesium that all work. They work really well at neutralizing different toxins in our body. Particularly, magnesium helps to neutralize aluminum in our system. Zinc and selenium help to neutralize mercury in our system. Iodine helps to neutralize fluoride and also things like BPA in our system. And if we don't supply those nutrients while we're at the same time trying to eliminate the heavy metal toxicities and chemical toxicities, we go back to that problem. If our yard's full of dandelions and all we do is go out and dig up those dandelions and leave a bunch of holes in the yard, and we don't fill that back up with nice grass or grass seed and fertilizer of some sort, we end up with a yard that's just as ugly as it was with the dandelions. And all of those holes would be perfect places for new dandelion seeds to take root, right? So in order to, as we're pulling heavy metals out of the system, we need to be infusing the body with nutrients. We got to get those nutrients into the system. So we offset that load of toxicity with a influx of nutrition. So we have those nutrients so the body can heal and fix itself. To recap, we have diet, where we have one half of the diet is vegetable, a quarter of the diet is fruit, and a quarter of the diet is protein. We have cleansing, detoxification of the colon, the GI tract, the liver, the kidneys, and the lymphatic system. And then we have where we move on into detoxifying the body of chemicals and heavy metals and those types of things, while at the same time infusing the body with nutrients. We got to get the body, we got to fill in the holes, right? So those are the steps. Now there's other therapies. There's neurofeedback therapies. There's biofeedback therapies. There's cranial sacral therapy. Cranial sacral therapy in particular is a very, very good therapy for restoring proper blood flow in the head, in the cranium, in the skull, which is where your brain is, by the way. And then the neurofeedback therapies and biofeedback therapies are very good. They're electrical therapies that help to retrain the brain and can actually reroute neurons, and it's very, very good therapies, very helpful for Alzheimer's. Some folks have a real difficult time with heavy metal detoxing, and when we use things like EDTA or DMPS or DMSA, those are sometimes so aggressive that it just causes more inflammation for them, and they actually have a real hard time with it. The things that we use, the things that I have, are very powerful antioxidants, while at the same time they're very powerful heavy metal removers, and they neutralize pesticides and herbicides and things like that.
Alzheimer's terrifies a lot of people. You know, this as one doctor said, you know, they come and say, I don't want that brain-eating disorder that I saw my granny go down with. And people, of course, know that labs are burning the midnight oil trying to come up with answers to this. What we've seen is some amazing studies. Vitamin D deficiency is very prevalent in this. Excess or high sugar diets would actually position Alzheimer's historically as being bang on target for 1906, which is when they named it after Dr. Alois Alzheimer, because that's coming about 20 to 25 years after sugar and refined flour is unleashed into our society for the very first time in unlimited quantities. Other studies, the vitamin B group, high potency vitamin B complex, was studied at Guildford and London, and shows that you can methylate buildups of homocysteine, which when those levels get over 13 micromoles, people go into the fog. They started developing cognitive problems. And by introducing high levels of vitamin B12, we're seeing that that's methylating the homocysteine and bringing it back down under 8 micromoles. And literally, it's like flicking a switch. It's like pulling people out of the fog. So vitamin D, coconut oil has been well studied. Dr. Mary Newport has done a lot on this. There's a lot of very, very good, well-constructed, well-structured studies that are showing that if you get somebody going into early stage cognitive impairment, there's a huge amount you can do. And we should be doing it.
My husband, Steve, he was an accountant. He worked at home for my practice so that he could take care of our children at home. And when he was about 51 years old, he began having memory issues, making payroll mistakes, having trouble organizing his accounting, and then he began forgetting if he'd been to the bank and the post office, which was very odd. He was only 2 years older than me, and I didn't think I would forget that type of thing. And at first we attributed it to depression, but he kept getting worse. And in 2004, when he was only 54 years old, he was officially diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And he had the early onset form of the disease, which happens in about 2% of people with Alzheimer's and people who are less than 65 years of age. I just happened upon this information about ketones as an alternative fuel for the brain on the internet. A press release about a medical food that was being studied. It wasn't going to be out for another year. It improved the memories of nearly half the people who took it with Alzheimer's disease. And I had to find out what it was. And I learned from their patent application that it was medium-chain triglyceride oil. And I was familiar with that because I'm a neonatologist. We used to add it to the feedings of our premature newborns, a little bit to each feeding. our tiniest ones, because they absorbed it very well and because it helped them grow faster. So I knew right away what MCT oil was. I think if I wasn't a neonatologist, I would not have, nothing further would have happened. I wouldn't have known that I could get it and what it might be able to do. But with Stephen, what happened was I knew that coconut oil was available over the counter, and I learned from the patent application that MCT oil is extracted from coconut oil, and coconut oil is about 60% medium chain triglycerides. So he was scheduled for 2 screenings for 2 different clinical trials, 2 days in a row. And I learned this information the night before the first screening and didn't really have time to go out and do anything about it. So we had a day before and a day that he started coconut oil. It was very amazing. And the first screening, when we didn't have it available, he scored 2 points below the threshold that he needed to get into the clinical trial. And that was devastating. He was asked to draw a clock. He drew a few little random circles and a few numbers. I think it was 9, 10, 11, 12. Just a very random, nothing structured like a clock. And I was told that he was on the verge of severe Alzheimer's. So I thought, what do we have to lose? I'm going to pick up some coconut oil, and we stopped at a health food store on the way home. And when we got home, I looked on the internet for more information to remind myself what are the medium chain triglycerides. I found the fatty acid composition from a USDA website of coconut oil and learned that it was 60%. So I calculated how much coconut oil I would need to give him to equal 20 grams of medium chain triglycerides that they were using in the medical food. So the next day, that turned out to be a little over 2 tablespoons of coconut oil. And the next morning, a few hours before he was scheduled for the screening, I put a little over 2 tablespoons of coconut oil in some oatmeal, and he ate that. And several hours later, he improved. We were in a different center than we were the previous day, but he remembered a different town that we were in. He remembered the day of the week. He remembered the season. He knew what floor we were on, and those were things that he could not remember the day before when he took the mini mental status test. And this time he scored 18, which was 2 points over the threshold to get into the clinical trial. So he was literally accepted into a clinical trial because of his response to simply taking coconut oil. And, at first, I wasn't 100% sure, did we just get very lucky or was it really the coconut oil? But we decided to keep it going. And so every morning in the beginning, he would get a little over 2 tablespoons of coconut oil. And then I started cooking with it and got every recipe I could get my hands on, and eventually added MCT oil. And I continued coconut oil because that's what he improved from. Initially, I thought, what if there's something in coconut oil that's not in MCT oil that has something to do with this effect? So we incorporated both into his diet, and we saw steady improvement over about a 9-month to 10-month period, where he went from the day before not even being able to draw a clock, and if we were gardening, for example, he couldn't remember if he was digging a hole or filling it in. He would get confused about the simplest things that he was doing. He had great difficulty finishing a sentence. And over a 9 to 10 month period, he improved so much. Physical symptoms went away, like tremors and a stiff gait. His memory began to improve. The animation came back in his face. People with Alzheimer's often have kind of they call it a dead look. That came back. His sense of humor came back. He had a visual disturbance where he could not read, and he couldn't describe it until after it went away with coconut oil. He said it was like the words were moving around on a page. The shaking stopped, and then he was able to read again. 9 to 10 months after we started this, he was able to remember what he had read earlier in the day and tell me about it. And one example of that is we were in a doctor's office. I was the one that had the appointment, and he sat in the waiting room. And there were Scientific American and other magazines on the table. And several hours after we left the doctor's office, he said, I was reading this Scientific American article about Albert Einstein, and he told me details about that. And And it was just so profound to me that he had come so far that before he started using coconut oil, he couldn't remember if he was filling in a hole or digging the dirt out of it, and now he could remember what he had read, something that detailed several hours earlier. It was just really an amazing journey to see his recovery and reversal of a lot of his symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. And one of the overwhelming things about it was now I have this information that nobody else knows. The medical food in the press release, they didn't say what it was or how it worked. And here, this is a little case study, a study of one person who responded very quickly to taking medium chain triglycerides. In this case, it was coconut oil in the form of coconut oil. And, this medical food wasn't going to be out for a while, and I thought, this is on the shelf. People need to know about this. They need to know about it now, and there are 5 million people in the United States and 30 million or so people worldwide, that have this problem, and they don't have time. When you have Alzheimer's, you progressively get worse. Normally, there's no turning around, and I felt like people's brain cells were literally dying while I had this information. So it became really an obsession of mine to get the message out and to just let everybody know about it as quickly as possible. And
what would be your message to people out there that are suffering with Alzheimer's?
I would say that to look at nutrition. Look at nutrition as a guide to trying to get better. Exercise can do that. Taking foods like coconut oil and medium chain triglycerides can do that. Reducing the carbohydrate in the diet can do that. So that there are things that can be done that could increase fuel to the brain, which is extraordinarily important in Alzheimer's disease. And for people who want to prevent it, if you have a family history of it, you need to know that this process could be starting 20 or 30 years before you have symptoms. So reducing sugar in the diet, I think, is just extraordinarily important.
Right. So the conventional medical approach to managing Alzheimer's is to give a monotherapy. It's to give a medication, and typically what's given is donepezil and or memantine. And these do not attack the cause of the problem. So you're essentially trying to trick nature, go around and say, okay, we can alter the system. They don't affect the large number of contributors. So we initially identified 36 different contributors, and we tell people, imagine you have a roof with 36 holes in it. You want to close all the holes, and of course for different people the holes are different sized. And your vitamin D, your estradiol, your NGF, your BDNF, these things all tell you something about your risk. So the conventional approach is to give a monotherapy like donepezil or memantine, and it's been relatively unsuccessful. You can get an improvement, but then you go right back to decline again. So as far as an alternative approach, and I think we talk about alternative medicine, but for so many of these complex chronic illnesses, whether you're talking about type 2 diabetes or metabolic syndrome or a number of the autoimmune diseases or congestive heart failure or atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, instead of calling these alternative, we should perhaps call them effective, because they are the most effective things we have now for type 2 diabetes, the most effective things we have for autoimmune diseases, the most effective things we have for some of the gut health related diseases. So this alternative, or in this case, first effective approach for cognitive decline involves a very, very different approach. Instead of saying, we have a small data set, we know that you have Alzheimer's disease, but we don't know why you got it, and we're going to give you a monotherapy and you're not going to do well. We've changed everything. So first of all, we want to understand everything about what actually caused the disease. Therefore, we want a much, much larger data set, just as you would do in any sort of functional medicine evaluation. And frankly, the larger the better. We'd like to know all of the potential contributors to systemic inflammation and to local inflammation. And then we'd like to know, what are all the potential toxins you've been exposed to? These are all critical to understanding. From that, then we have an algorithm. What is actually causing your cognitive decline or your risk for cognitive decline? When you have a much larger data set, then you can look at that, and instead of saying, yeah, this is a mysterious illness, we don't know why you got it, this becomes a non-mysterious illness, and you can see the actual contributors to the cognitive decline. Then what we want to do is address each of these.
I think people give away their power instead of grasping a hold of it and really embracing it. They give their power to the doctors instead of relying on the fact that we were all born with the ability to heal. And we have healed ourselves so many times, hundreds if not millions of times, millions if not billions of times. We've healed ourselves because we were born with that ability. That's how we are made.
Too often we think of cognitive decline as irreversible. We have heard over and over again that the damage to the brain that causes Alzheimer's and dementia cannot be repaired. Yet, here we have heard some incredible testimonies of those who have been able to recover their full brain function after suffering from these ailments. What an exciting possibility to know that our brains are capable of healing and being restored. Thank you so much for being here. Look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thank you so much for watching this episode. I hope it's been a huge blessing in your life. Now, if you're feeling that this is a powerful resource that you'd like to own, then you can do that by clicking the link below. I just want to tell you that when you choose to support our mission by owning this series, not only are you supporting us to continue getting this message into the world so we can keep serving you, bringing you new series, and also supporting charities that are meaningful, like the ones that we're doing in Kenya with helping people that are on the brink of starvation, and with Eyes for India, with restoring eyesight to the blind. Not only are we able to do these things, but most importantly, you're able to have a resource in your home to help your family, to help your loved ones, and to be able to give these resources around, share them with your loved ones for many years to come, right? So it's such a powerful tool. This information isn't something that you can get anywhere, and that's why we felt the need to create it. So if you've been blessed, then consider owning the series today, because you can make a special saving during our early bird discount. So you can take that today and then get all the exciting bonuses that come with it, and continue to use this tool to bless your life, to bless the lives of others, to help people that are facing autoimmune conditions, or help the people that want to simply prevent disease and not be a part of the statistics. You're fully covered by a 60-day money-back offer, no questions asked, so you can just try it out today and see if you love it, and then make the decision from there. So thank you so much for watching this episode. Thank you so much for being on this journey. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thank you for your consideration of support of our mission and your health. So thank you.